Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us here. Whether you're listening on the podcast or you're watching on YouTube, in this video, we're going to be going over the definitive rankings of the 2021 season's NFL running backs. Now, the criteria that we're going to have for this one's pretty simple. It's going to be based on talent and production mixed together. So if you have a running back, i.e. Christian McCaffrey, who is your favorite running back in the league, you think he's the best, but he missed half the season, he's not going to be placed number one. And, conversely, if you have a guy who maybe isn't the best running back in the world, but he just got so many touches and his team just kept throwing him the ball and he just racked up the stats, but I think he's less talented than a lot of other guys who just, didn't have the opportunity to run the football, he might be placed a little bit lower. So that being said, let's move into the bottom of the list. Right here, we've got our 30 through 44, or if we're counting down, 40 up to 30. So starting at 44, I've got Myles Gaskin of the Miami Dolphins. I think he is arguably one of the worst starting running backs in the league. And it's just unfortunate that for Tua, he was never really able to get a guy, in that backfield with him. We've got Ramondre Stevenson, who was really, really good in his role in New England. Chase Edmonds, who is technically the backup in Arizona, real good running back. Devontae Booker, who filled in admirably for Saquon Barkley in New York. Rashad Penny, who filled in for Chris Carson in Seattle. So you notice a lot of these guys are necessarily backups, but they're starters who have to back up, and then they filled in roles. So Tony Pollard next on the list, a lot of his snaps came in when, Zeke wasn't necessarily at his best. Then we've got one of my favorite running backs in the league, Cordarrelle Patterson, somebody who I think, is on a fairly or unfairly a Hall of Fame trajectory, because in my personal opinion, I think he's the second best return man of all time, only behind Devin Hester. And then we just saw what he can actually be if a team legitimately used him. His yards per carry, yards per touch, reception, whatever you want to call it, were fantastic this year. He managed to find the end zone. He really was Atlanta's offense, and he was their most valuable player this year. We've got Alexander Mattison, again, another backup who filled in well for Dalvin Cook. Then we come to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who's a guy who I think is pretty overrated, but they used him mostly well in Kansas City. Jamal Williams, who, went from being the backup in Green Bay to being the backup in Detroit, and he's really good at what he does. He's, what you'd call the scat back. He's incredibly fast, and he's just an extremely likable guy. Darrell Henderson, who ended up having to start for the Rams after Cam Akers went down in August of last season. Darrell Henderson performed well. He's just not really a starting caliber running back. So, his talent is low and his production wasn't as high. Now, part of that was the fact that the Rams guard center guard combo is one of the worst out of any playoff teams that we had this year. But he still performed well enough to be marked in this top 32. Saquon Barkley at 31 and Christian McCaffrey at 30 are my nod to these guys being probably the most talented running backs in the league at 1 and 2. If you could guarantee me that any running back in the NFL was going to stay healthy and I could have them, number 1 would be Christian McCaffrey. And number 2 would probably Saquon Barkley. Dalvin Cook would be very, very close in that conversation. But these guys are just phenomenal. Their talent and their production that they put in for the games that they played put them in this conversation. But unfortunately, they didn't just have the volume of stats this year. And so they get brought down into the 30s. Our rankings 29 all the way up to 15. We start with D'Ernest Johnson in Cleveland. He's a guy that I loved. I loved him so much because I know that Cleveland's running game is built around their offensive line. That's all it is just guys pushing 4 yards ahead. Like Nick Chubb averages the most yards before contact in the NFL. It's one of the most dominating offensive lines we've seen. I think it's better than what the old Cowboys line used to be around 2017. Not quite as good as the 2015 line, but a little bit better than the older Cowboys line. The 2 games he started, he was an absolute animal. There's not enough you can say about a guy who really just stepped in and ended up proving himself to everybody. 28, I've got Miles Sanders, who, super talented. Unfortunately, he just didn't get to play every single game this year. Michael Carter on the New York Jets, who really started coming along in the second half of the season. He's a really good player. We'd like to see how his career ends up developing, if he can be somebody that New York can actually rely on as a starting running back. Kareem Hunt, who I think has the talent to be a top 5 running back. He's one of those guys that's up there with Christian McCaffrey, with a Dalvin Cook, Saquon Barkley, all those guys up in there. Kareem Hunt, one of the best receiving backs in the league. It's him, it's Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, and Austin Eckler. And he's also incredibly fast and incredibly strong at the point of attack. It's just, he's a backup for some reason. He's the better running back than Nick Chubb, but they use him as a backup, and he wasn't fully healthy. Nobody really honestly is, but he didn't get to play every game. So this is why he gets stuck back here at 26. One spot above him, James Conner, somebody who played incredibly well this season, found the end zone a ton. And although he necessarily wasn't as effective as you'd want him to be as a starting running back, he did what he needed to do well on a team that is heavy on the pass. At 24, we've got Devin Singletary. At 23, we've got Mark Ingram. These two guys are really interesting. Devin Singletary had to share a lot of his time with Zach Moss. I don't think that either of them are particularly fantastic, but Devin Singletary is a little bit better, and the margins are thin. That's why he ends up getting this nod. Mark Ingram, who started the season on the Houston Texans in that really crowded backfield with Phillip Lindsay and David Johnson, ends up going to the Saints after the Saints start losing players. Alvin Kamara goes down a little bit, and he fills in really well. He actually ended up having a pretty good season. I think it was around 800 or 900 yards, probably not 900, maybe 6 to 800 yards, somewhere in there. Sony Michel, who later in the season for the Rams, because he got traded, I believe it was like during the preseason from the Patriots to the Rams, he ended up filling in really well in what he did. Second half of the season, he really was the starter because Darrell Henderson got hurt on the Rams, and Sony Michel filled in well. Again, I don't like the guard center guard combo on the Los Angeles Rams. So Sony Michel's production was slightly limited, but his talent is there. He's a strong downfield running back, and he did what he needed to do. Speaking of strong downfield running backs, A.J. Dillon at 21 is an incredible football player. I believe his nickname is Quadzilla. He's got just some massive legs, and he's really built for that Green Bay atmosphere. Green Bay, I'd like to see them get their hands on a pass-catching back. Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon aren't really pass-catching backs. They will, just because the opportunity is there, but no, he did really well, especially filling in for Aaron Jones whenever Aaron Jones was out due to injury. James Robinson, a guy who I just think is plagued with being on a terrible team. He reminds me a lot of Jay Ajayi and what he used to be on the Miami Dolphins, just an incredibly strong, fast bowling ball type of player. I'd like to see some more happen with him. Unfortunately for him, personally, the Jaguars drafted Travis Etienne, who I think is a really good running back. At least he's going to be this next year. So James Robinson might not get his chance in Jacksonville, but I could see a career resurgence for him, kind of like Leonard Fournette had in Tampa Bay versus in Jacksonville, coincidentally. And speaking of Leonard Fournette, the next two running backs at 19 are David Montgomery and 18, Leonard Fournette. Leonard Fournette, who he had an incredible season. He's a very good running back, probably a top 12, just pure talent in the league. Unfortunately, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers never ran the football because Tom Brady was trying to pad his stats and win the MVP this year. So Leonard Fournette didn't get as much attention as he necessarily should have. David Montgomery, he's just on a terrible team with a terrible offensive line and a terrible offensive coordinator. No weapons outside. His talent is there. It might be hard to see, but there was just no production. As far as meaningful production. Then we've got Aaron Jones, Josh Jacobs, and Eli Mitchell, all what you might call like part-time starters on decent to good teams. These guys have other running backs in the fold that can kind of take the load off them, and so they're not necessarily ever going to be one of those feature backs, but they're really good at what they do, and they are the best running back in their room. Now we get into the kind of the cream of the crop as far as the best guys outside of the top 5 from this last season. We've got number 14 all the way up to number 16. So starting there, we've got Javonte Williams, the rookie out of North Carolina, I believe, that ended up going to Denver. We've got DeAndre Swift, the second or third year player out of Georgia on the Lions. These guys are really good. DeAndre Swift is an excellent pass catching back, but that's not what we're doing right now. We're just doing straight up running back. And he didn't get to play much of the season. Now, Javonte Williams, he was plagued by another little bit of an issue, and that's, being sat behind Melvin Gordon, who at this point in his career is just a little better. We've got Ezekiel Elliott at number 12. He's just past his prime. That's all it is. Alvin Kamara at 11. Injuries plagued his season. Otherwise, he's always been a producer. Never one of the top 4 or 5 producers, but he's up there in talent. Najee Harris at number 10. I don't think he's a top 10 running back skill-wise, but he had the second most touches in the NFL this season, just behind Jonathan Taylor. And so the production has to speak for itself. Najee Harris had a really excellent season. Guy we mentioned earlier, Melvin Gordon at number 9. He's somebody who I think is probably going to get phased out, and his career is probably going to start going downhill. I wouldn't be surprised if his career takes the Devonta Freeman path, where at one point he was a feature back, and just, for the fact that new running backs are coming into the league, getting better, he kind of gets phased out. We've got Damian Harris for the New England Patriots at number 8. Now, this guy had an incredible season. I believe he's a rookie. I don't remember too much about him, but I know that he had a ton of yards. He had a ton of touchdowns, and the Patriots really, really pulled a gem out in this one. Austin Eckler on the Los Angeles Chargers had a great season scoring the football, receiving and rushing. Is pretty balanced with this guy. He's strong. He's up the middle. He's not overly fast, but he's good at playmaking. He's one of the best receiving backs in the National Football League, and so I respect him by putting him up here. Not one of the best pure rushers, but this season just speaks for itself. His production was off the charts, and he got absolutely robbed of a Pro Bowl appearance. It was unfathomable that he didn't make it. And at number 6, we've got Antonio Gibson, who is probably just the best offensive player on a terrible team. It's probably going to be between him and, scary Terry McLaurin. But Antonio Gibson just had a ton of yards and a few touchdowns, and he had a really good season. Now, moving into the top 5, we're going to go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so at the 5th spot from this past 2021 season is Nick Chubb. He came in second in the league in rushing yards at 1,259. He had 8 touchdowns, which was tied for 7th. He had a whopping 5.5 yards per rush and 61 total first downs. Now, I've already mentioned how I feel about Nick Chubb. I think he's a product of a fantastic offensive line and a fantastic running system with Kevin Stefanski, but he is good at what he does. They ask him to run the football, and that's what he does. He can't really catch, unlike Kareem Hunt, who's an excellent receiving back, so I still don't know why they don't use Kareem Hunt more often. But Nick Chubb put up the numbers to be a top 5 running back this year. At number 4, we've got Joe Mixon, who came in 3rd in the league in rushing yards, just behind at 1,205. He had 13 touchdowns, which is good enough for 3rd in the league, 4.1 yards per rush, and 60 first downs. So a lot of these numbers are really similar to Nick Chubb. The only difference is Joe Mixon is an excellent receiving back. He's an excellent athlete, and he was playing behind a horrendous offensive line. Number 3, we've got Dalvin Cook, who, even though he missed several games and, a lot of time, I believe he partially tore something in his knee and then came back like 7 or 8 days later to end up recording like another 500 yards to end the season or something like that. It's just ridiculous. He had 1,159 yards, which is good enough for 5th in the NFL. He had 6 touchdowns, which isn't fantastic, but he did average 4.7 yards per rush and have 57 first downs. So all of this, having limited time and playing behind a slightly below average offensive line, puts Dalvin Cook at the 3 spot. I think his talent is top 3, and I think his production was just barely outside of it, but we're going to put him here. At number 2, we've got Derrick Henry. This one may be controversial because it's just who had, if it was who had the best season, Derrick Henry would probably be around 10th. But, he had 937 rushing yards, which is 9th, and he only played half the season. He had 10 touchdowns, which is tied for 5th. And again, he only played half the season. He averaged 4.3 yards per rush, which isn't fantastic, but people stack the box against Derrick Henry more than they stack the box against maybe the next 2 guys combined. It's ridiculous. He had 49 first downs, which if you look back here, Dalvin Cook had 57. Joe Mixon played the whole season. He had 60. So when somebody only has 11 more first downs than you and they played like 9 more games than you, it's just ridiculous. Derrick Henry is a man amongst boys when he plays football. And to no one's surprise, the number one running back from the 2021 NFL season is Jonathan Taylor. He set the running back triple crown, if you want to say, in attempts, in rushes, and in touchdowns. He had 1,811 rushing yards, which is first. 18 touchdowns, which again is first. 5.5 yards per rush, which is fantastic. 101 first downs, which is first by far. It's about first by 40. And 14 rushes for 20 plus yards, which is first. 5 rushes for 40 plus yards, which is first. And you can do that for every yardage mark. He had the most 10-yard rushes, the most 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70-yard rushes in the National Football League. Just a monster of a season. This former Wisconsin Badger is somebody who I wanted the Detroit Lions to take in the second round when he came out, because they had a couple picks right before the Colts. Unfortunately, they took DeAndre Swift, which, no shit on DeAndre Swift. He's good at what he does, but he's no Jonathan Taylor, the best running back in the National Football League. So there you have it, folks. There's the definitive ranking. If you're on YouTube, be sure to leave a comment where you think your running back stands, where they should be, and where I placed them. Let me know what you think. Thank you guys for listening. Thanks you guys for watching, and be sure to stay up to date on all of our future content.